this doesn't feel right. Like something's wrong. And so I'd stand outside for like 10, 12 hours a day, getting donations. And then my parents would take it for rent money. And so I was like working and hustling at a young age and didn't really realize like, oh, this is like stealing. And then I started working. I think I had my first like real job at like 14 or 15. Um, and then that gave me like a little bit more sense of structure.
Sarah, welcome. Uh,
Hi.
Sarah, who are you? Where are you? What do you do?
I am a coach and nutritionist out of San Diego, California. And I also run a women's gym here, women's focused gym. So we do group classes, group personal training, and it's been awesome.
Wonderful. Well, your can you give me a little bit of background on like how you're how you entered into the world of professional fitness nutrition person?
Yeah, that why has actually changed as of recently, which is interesting. But I, I grew up with a not so healthy family, and being the oldest of four children, I wanted to set the example. So I got into like sports as a kid. I think I took weight training as like an elective in eighth grade. So I was like 12 or 13 lifting. Not I think there was like two women in the class. um and ever since then I just kind of fell in love with being active. Part of it was the avoidance of not wanting to be home. So that was there. And it kind of just grew into my friends asking me, "Oh, I see you're doing this. What do how are you getting there? How are you looking this way? How are you, pushing through these long days? You're going to school, you're doing all this stuff." And I'm like, "Well, I work out." And my family started asking me to show them what to do or tell them what to do. And I was maybe 15, 16. So I didn't really realize I was training people until I realized that you can get paid to do that. And then I was like, oh, this is something I love to do. But I had always gone away from it. And I think I was kind of scared scared of the like idea of doing only that because I always had like a steady job or like a paycheck elsewhere. And so I had all these management level jobs or sales jobs or bartending, things like that throughout my most of my young adult life. And then had always been a trainer as well. And then kind of like pulled the trigger in like excuse me, 2016-ish, um, to mainly do this and to choose this and as a trainer and a coach. And that has been the solid foundation of my growth in every other aspect of my life. There's other things that I do and have my fingers in, but this is like the main focus of my life now. And it's been probably the biggest risk ever in doing so, but I couldn't be more uh content with making that choice either.
So did it require you to make like personal sacrifices to make that leap in 2016, which is like what, 8 years ago at this point?
Yeah, I moved to San Diego around the same time, so I didn't know anybody here. I moved here for a former partner, so at the time I had a little bit of a foundation, but I didn't really have a core group of friends. I didn't have my feet on the ground as far as like what part of town I was living in. I didn't have a routine. So everything was kind of up in the air. And then so I just kind of like dove into my own training and then had another job in the meantime when I first moved here. And then slowly started picking up clients and getting, my name out there and getting into certain gyms. And I was lucky to find a gym here that had a owner of the gym that was really like opening his door to mentoring me and giving me insight into like how to market myself as a coach. I never liked the idea of working for somebody else as a trainer, like working for, they're awesome gyms, but like 24-hour fitness or any of those bigger corporate gyms. I didn't like the idea of working like a set number of hours for them. So I decided like this was what I was going to choose, even though it was the harder route to go. And it took me a few years to really like actually make sense of all of it. But once I did that and just kept putting in the time and energy into it, like it all kind of made sense to me. And from there, it's just taken off. So
Yeah, well, you seem like I can like hear in the sort of timbre of your voice that you're kind of you're a strong person. You're um you're somebody who's used to being independent and somebody who is used to sort of taking life's challenges on head on. You seem like you're a pretty tough person to me. I mean, it's kind of obvious in the way that you speak, but usually that's a lesson that is learned in life. Usually we sort of we have to go the wrong way, or we have to get our asses kicked pretty hard before that gets woken up in us. That's the experience that I've had over and over again in life. Would you say that's accurate for your life as well?
Yeah, I think part of it too has to be like a survival mode. I think it's either like a sink or swim choice. And instinctually my family was very poor growing up. We didn't have the things that my friends had. We couldn't afford to go on certain field trips, or couldn't go camping because my parents had to work or I had to work, so there's financial hindrance future. So I decided like, oh, I'll just work myself into the ground. And so I decided that when you're younger, you can, physically afford to do that. So I worked like 13-hour days, sometimes 16-hour days, a lot smarter through hell, so to speak, in order to keep myself where I'm at. But yeah, it wasn't really like I didn't really have a reliance on other people for one. And two, like I just knew the cars I were given weren't mine. Like it was very interesting. It's almost like an ego thing too, but I feel like when I was younger, I would be in my apartment and we were six people in a two-bedroom apartment. Like it was insane. Um I would be sitting there at like 13, 14 years old and just felt out of place. Like I was like, no, this is like where I'm supposed to. And so instinctually, like you just push through that and you decide. I think I kind of run towards challenges because that's what brings me into like a different space. And if I'm not challenged, I get myself into trouble. You get caught up like going out drinking or enjoying life a little too much, and then it ends up pulling you away from the things that you need to be doing. So I've learned lessons in that regard for sure.
How old were you when you got your first job?
Well, I think I started working at like 12. Um, Off the radar working, like doing things for, other people, fundraising. I was, I wouldn't even say I didn't even know what it was at the time, but my dad, this is so messed up. My dad would have me like stand out front of grocery stores and fundraise for cheerleading because I wasn't cheer. And once you realize that I could make money doing that for cheerleading and paid off the year, he realized that was a way to make money. So he influenced me to do that for the family, not knowing that that's wrong. And realizing like after a couple years, I'm like, oh my God, like this doesn't feel right. Like something's wrong. And so I'd stand outside for like 10, 12 hours a day, getting donations. And then my parents would take it for rent money. And so I was like working and hustling at a young age and didn't really realize like, oh, this is like stealing. And then I started working. I think I had my first like real job at like 14 or 15. Um, and then that gave me like a little bit more sense of structure. But yeah, I think, yeah, I'd say like 12 is when I really started to like make income.
Did your dad have a job?
When I was 12, we were under the impression he had a heart attack. And this is where my why changes, because that's kind of the reason why I got into coaching and doing all the stuff that I was doing, because I didn't want that for myself. And so um recently found out that never happened. And he had struggled with alcoholism and didn't want to go back to work. And so he locked himself in his room all day. And his way of, coping was that, but it wasn't honest. And he was like taking advantage through this process. And that's when my why had to change, because I was like, oh, now I have to make it about myself. Because before it was that. Um, but yeah, he didn't work after, I think after 12 or 13 years old, he didn't work. So it was just like me and whatever my mom's income was at the time.
You were the oldest of four kids.
Mhm.
And how old were you when you left home for the first time?
I think I was 17.
And what was that experience like for you? What did you how did you support yourself? Like where did you go?
Oh, I was working. I did move in with a high school boyfriend and his mom at the time. Because I was already over there like every day after school and stuff. And so I was graduating early at that point and going to college as well. So not only was I working a full-time job, I was taking high school classes and college classes, but I was really tired of not being able to have my own money because all my money was going into their bills. And so I just decided like this wasn't working for me. And so I moved out and that was that. So I think I had my first apartment at like 18, 19, somewhere around there. But yeah, it was a good experience for sure.
What did your parents say whenever you wanted to leave home?
Well, my mom had already left at that point. So she didn't say anything. My dad was apprehensive. But that, I mean, that's just because, um, you know, he wasn't getting anything from me at that point. So it kind of changed after that. But it was a better decision for me. It was more freeing for sure.
Are you close to your siblings?
Yeah. We're all spread out. So my brothers are in Vegas and then my dad is in or my sister is in Boise. Um but I've lived in both of those places, so it's kind of a nice excuse to go and visit them. But we all have like our group chat. We keep each other pretty close. And It's just funny because now we're all bonding over the different levels of stuff we had to deal with growing up, but as adults. So it's an interesting dynamic between us for sure.
Where did you live whenever you were growing up?
I we were most of the time in a suburb north of Sacramento area, and it was like I think we had a house at first, and then we moved all around. We were homeless for a minute, but mainly all over that area. And then I moved to the first time I moved out of state, I think I was like 23, 24, and I moved to Vegas for a couple years.
Being somebody who comes from an unhealthy household, how did that affect like when you were younger? When you were younger, did you want to have a family and did you have those sorts of priorities when you were younger, or were you more interested in just sort of um making money and not being in the sort of impoverished situation that you grew up in?
Oh no, I think it made me want to have a family more when I was younger. I think even in my early 20s, I was like ready, and you're like, oh, I want to get married and have kids. I was like 21 talking about it. I think it's just because I wanted to do it different. I'm not saying my parents did it wrong. They had the tools that they had, and I wouldn't be the person I am today had they not brought us the way that they did, brought us up that way. But yeah, it's interesting. I think I've always wanted that family dynamic, but I just never, because you're avoiding it happening again or avoiding that same experience happening, you become a little bit more picky with, who you choose that with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a part of you got shaped through that experience for better or worse. And I'd say your attitude towards the experience and towards your parents is very mature, that you're able to look at it objectively and you're able to see um, that you gained something from it that you were able to use to your advantage, because it's going to be a part of you for the rest of your life, one way or the other. And you can either come to terms with those things or you can let them be the the
Yeah.
demon in the shadows that affect your behavior in ways that you don't understand.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think are some of the positive things that you got out of that experience?
Resilience is one thing. I don't like being told not that I can't do something because that's been like a repeated thing upon climbing the ladder in the corporate world when I was in there, or like, as an adult, like knowing that I'm gonna have my own business and things like that at a young age. I think when you're told, oh, you can't do this, you're too young, or you can't do this, you've only been with the company for so long, or it like pisses me off and makes me want to like go and do it even more. So that's kind of been my attitude. And I think that comes from like, my parents being like, oh, you can't do this because we don't have the money or we don't. I'm like, all right, well, I'll figure it out. So I just don't like being told no. um, so that's like one part of it. And I want to say, um, probably just learning to appreciate the smaller things that you do have, even when you have nothing. Um, like I said, I've been homeless as a kid for a small period of time. And then when I was an adult, I made a really silly decision to move to Hawaii with a one-way ticket and had like no money in my account. Thought I had a job lined up, thought I had all the things in a row. Well, people from the mainland can be manipulated easily when moving to an island because you're in an island and they know
Can't
you're
you can't hitchhike
looking
back home.
for work. Yeah, there's no like it's really hard to vet a company that you're going to work for before you get there if they're, not a known company, beforehand. So you have to kind of like F around, find out, so to speak. And so I did. And I ended up homeless in Hawaii, which was really interesting. Um, but I found myself like in the most beautiful, crazy, like communal situations because of that happening. And I wouldn't have happened had I not been in such a horrible situation. So it's like, it's funny when you're in it and you're like, God, this sucks. Like, this could be a worst case scenario. Everything's happening to me right now. But in hindsight, like things just like kind of pull away and you're like, oh my God, that was awesome. Like at the same time. So there's just like I have that kind of perspective on things, which is not everyone has that. I'm not saying that to like toot my own horn, but when you look at other people's experiences, like they really allow things to affect them. And I do to an extent, but I get through things pretty quickly. At least I like to think I do, but who knows?
Well, you've had a very rich life and you've come out of it stronger as a result. So maybe your horn needs a little bit of tooting. I wouldn't feel bad about that. Do you feel like I get a sense of you that you're a person who is able to manage stress like really, really well. Do you think that's a byproduct of all of these like really sort of disastrous and difficult things that you've been through?
I honestly think it's that survival mode thing and I'm realizing managing stress and handling stress are two different things. And for me, I'm more of an avoidant and so I will if I'm going through something horrible like a breakup or like, some other crazy atrocious thing that you don't expect to happen, I'll make myself 10 times busier so that I don't have to think about it. And yeah, I'm managing stress because I'm like, oh, they're like, oh, you're killing it. You're doing all of these things. But it's like I think Tyler Perry had said something recently, like grief will wait for you. It's not gonna just like go away. And if you're sitting there just like working and trying to distract yourself and whether you're going out drinking with people or trying to have a good time, it's still waiting for you. It's just not surfaced yet. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that's like more work to hide that kind of thing and to like avoid the stress. So it's like you have to kind of go head on into it and just let it be what it is and deal with it rather than expecting it to go away on its own because it's not going to. It's just going to compound and you're going to have to deal with it later at different times. So I'm realizing it now that like handling stress and managing it, like, I don't know if those are the right words for that comparison, but you can't just like ignore it anymore. At a certain point, you have to like deal with it.
Sometimes life, especially when difficult things happen to us when we're young, life makes you thick-skinned and it puts a burden on you that has made you strong and maybe made you able to carry a lot. But everybody's got a limit. And if you build those
Yeah.
habits of just stacking stuff on yourself and keeping going when you're young, when you become an adult, those things really start to accumulate. And no matter how strong you are, you hit your knees eventually. And it's hard to, when those moments come, it's hard to know who you are and it's hard to know what to do and how to get help and how to let go of things, and so you can stand up and have a fresh outlook on life. So it sounds like you've burnt out before, hit the wall, that sort of thing. If you've learned the lesson that you just explained.
Yeah, it's for sure a double-edged sword because you're like, on one hand, you're capable of handling a lot of things. And on the other hand, like it does catch up at one point, and if you're not used to dealing with it, then it's almost like impossible when it seems impossible when it actually comes, to the surface, or when you're tired, or when it's like you feel helpless. Like you're just like, oh, this burden's crazy. Like I've never experienced this before. Why am I feeling this way? And it has to do with that ego, like pride thing. Like you're not wanting to ask for help, or you're not wanting to go to therapy, or you're not wanting to tell people what you're going through, because you have your whole life been the independent, resilient person who thinks that you can handle it, and like, oh, I got this, no big deal. But then like your ego's bruised a little bit when you're like, shit, this is actually hard. I need to ask for help, because we don't have the tools. Not, we don't always have the tools. And as I get older, I'm like, okay, you know what? No, I need to like just allow this to be a shitty situation and realize like it's okay to like ask for help sometimes, or it's okay to take a break or a day off and not have to explain yourself why you're doing it.
Yeah, I had a martial arts teacher who once said, well, he said it quite a bit, but that your strength is your weakness. And
Hmm.
for somebody like you who's very, very tough on the outside, that
Hmm.
which is your strength, the being able to have a healthy relationship with your sensitive side is probably something
Hmm.
that's a real challenge for you, because
Hmm.
probably it feels like your sensitivity is a vulnerability, and it's a place where somebody could take advantage of you, or they could find a weakness to work on. And so I can see you maybe getting a little bit uncomfortable when when you start feeling sensitive
Hmm.
in different situations.
Yeah, that can be it. And I think most of it too is a lot of the times we perceive like strong, independent, focused business owners or people as people who are like dry or emotionless. Well, it's actually like a complete like facade. We're actually like the most sensitive, highly emotional people ever. But it's like a defense mechanism to just be like, no, I'm fine. Everything's fine. It's like that. And you ask, oh, how are you doing? Good. It's just like the simple, dry response because there's so many layers beneath it. It's just like once you open that like doorway to it, it's a lot to deal with. So a lot of times we're like, yeah, it's fine, everything's good. So I think it's more of like a defense mechanism than anything.
Yeah, when you're an entrepreneur, there's you wake up in the morning and you're like, well, everything's on fire and I don't know what to do. And you have a lot of mornings where you wake up like that, and you have no choice but to get up and to go out there and start stomping on the fire. Maybe you can put out one
Mhm.
little tiny piece of the fire, and that's what your day is, and you got to go do it. And I think that there's a point when you're really up to your neck in it, and you're committed, and you have no choice but to stick with the thing that you're doing. I think you do kind of get to a point where you don't want to show anything else, just because you're
Mhm.
kind of scared of what happens if you start talking to somebody about what's causing you stress or what you're upset about. I know I've had plenty of times where I'm worried I'm gonna like turn into a bowl of spaghetti being dumped out, just like everything going everywhere. And that's stress by itself, having that feeling.
Yeah, I'm a pretty open book when it comes to like my clients and stuff like that. I think we learn most from each other's experiences, even about ourselves. We learn from other people's experiences. So when it comes to that, like I'm pretty like forthright about all of the things that I'm dealing with, but um I'm just it's a way to process while you're working at the same time. Like you're talking about it, but you're also still technically working. So it's like a loophole. Um but yeah, it can be like an Achilles heel for sure, being the strong type of person, because then it seems like you never need help, and that's like far from beyond the truth.
So did when you talk about like having that insight and applying it to your relationship with your clients, is has your life experiences been have your life experiences been a motivating factor for like opening a women's gym, or was that more just like a marketing opportunity for you?
It kind of just happened that way, which is interesting. I feel like when I was younger, I had like always like a best friend or a couple of best friends growing up, like kept them close. My mom was always like my person to go to for everything. But when it comes to like peers or like people around me, I don't know why. I think it was because I was so close to my dad when I was younger that I had I had put myself more in like men's situational sports, things like that, like men's groups and stuff. I always got along with them better. And I never really felt like it could be like just like being in your masculine, I guess, because I had to be in like the survival state a lot of the time. And a lot of times that can be more of a masculine trait, being a provider, so to speak. So I just surrounded myself with more guys growing up. I don't know why. Um, and then as I got older, I started, I obviously train more women than I do men. So I think the women's gym was more of like a chosen family situation. Like I realized I not had the close people that I had growing up. And then once I started getting, closer with my current clients, I started realizing like, oh, I can do this and like create this safe space for them. Because a lot of times, like as an adult, it's hard to make friends. And there's a lot of women out here, especially in Southern California, that are single and are, providing for themselves. They don't have families or anything like that, or maybe they do and they're just super busy and they don't make time for themselves. So they wanted a space to come to where we have like the women's group chat and things like that, where they can just kind of like put little things in there to keep each other encouraged. And it's just like a nice space to have. And they hear about all my dating shenanigans and I hear about all their stuff. So it's just like it's such a tight knit like family now, rather than it being such like a I'm going to train you and hope you do the rest of the work when I see you later. It's more of a support system.
So do you find there are a lot of women who are seeking that sort of environment with fitness?
Oh, for sure. And it's the fitness itself, I think is just like I think that some people do come for that, but I really think they come just to like not check their emails for an hour, and like get away from all of the things. Or like their husband's watching their kid for an hour and they can actually have some time to themselves, whether it's driving in their car to class or like actually enjoying the class. So it's different. I think a lot of people think training is just like training and working out and counting the reps, but really it's just like a therapy. Like you're coming to get away from all of your life stresses for an hour and then you let it all out and you go home.
Fitness has obviously been something that's a core part of your identity and your lifestyle, your
Mhm.
for a very long time, since almost since adolescence. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that for most of us out there, a lot of people work out, but most people, myself included, are kind of mostly interested in, being physically attractive and not being not being as unhealthy, particularly as we age. And so you gained that out of necessity, though. Whenever you were in an unhealthy household as a very young person, you were able to find an outlet that was very healthy.
Mhm.
I also had somewhat bad home life growing up, and I was out of my house all the time. Like I just spent as little time at home as I possibly could. But um,
Mhm.
I had one advantage of being in the rural South, so there was a lot of sort of being out in the middle of nowhere doing nothing in outdoor activities. But I know for me, like I fell into drug use because when you don't have a family structure to grow on like a little vine, you're
Mhm.
gonna wander out there and find another structure. And that unfortunately for a lot of young people, the structure that they're going to cling to is going to be a really dangerous or unhealthy one.
Mhm.
How did you like avoid those traps?
Oh, I didn't avoid them.
Ah,
I didn't avoid those either. Yeah, I was in and out of partying and drinking a ton, and alcoholism runs in my family. So I didn't know that at the time. That was news to me as an adult. Um, and it wasn't. It's actually funny. A lot of people don't talk about this, but a lot of trainers are big party animals. Like you would not think that, but the more you get into the like training aspect of things in the community and you're seeing the same trainers all the time, we party just as hard as we work, and that's a problem. So luckily for me, I'm out of that now. But there were times, I mean, a lot of trainers are bartenders, or they're real estate agents, or they're there's always some other thing they're doing because the training life can be so inconsistent. And so into my early years of doing that, I was traveling a lot. I lived in Vegas for a while. I lived in Hawaii. I lived in Boise, and it was always new people. And my way of meeting new people was being in the bar industry at the same time as training. So it's like I would always get sucked in to, yeah, I'm training all week and eating clean. And then the weekend comes around and we're all out drinking all night, getting into like other hard drugs, like nothing. I mean, cocaine is the prevalent thing for most of us, but it's just like you have to find a reason to not do those things. And I think a lot of trainers get into fitness because they have addictive personalities and they like seeing the results, and they get sucked into training because they love how they feel. And it's like a high that comes with working out when you push yourself and you push your limits to that. But when you don't have that, the depression sinks in. And so then they go seeking other things. And that I found myself in that same space. Like I would find myself hanging out with people that were in that depression or that low end of their like peak when they're not training. So then, or, they have a couple days off and then it all goes out the window. So I would have to really find myself like having a reason to not do those things. And being really busy is a reason because you have to show up for other people. Um, but yeah, there would be like 6 months at a time where I would just like not, I would still be training people, but I would be out partying every weekend. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, you feel like shit after every single time you're doing it. And then it's that quick gratification, that high, you're with people, you feel good, you're like, oh, I'm doing it. Like, we're out here, in a big city or whatever. And then you realize, like, those people when you get sober are not around. Like those are your drinking friends, or those are your drug friends, or whatever they are. And you start to realize like the things you value aren't really the same as everyone else's. So I think like your environment is a big part of your choices. And so I've had to separate myself from people before, and that sucks and it's lonely for a while, but you start building better character within yourself once you let those types of people out of it.
when you make that decision to start focusing more on things that are useful in life and start to focus on growing a healthy life, did you find resentment from some of your friends who weren't doing that?
Oh yeah, and even now and again, I do social media management for a couple of bars, and occasionally we'll come in and work like a bartending, shift or whatever, just to help them out. And being on prep now for a competition, I cannot eat anything outside of my plan. I can't drink, so I have to bring my meals, and they're all well aware. But there's such a different lifestyle that comes with that. A lot of them are snacky chicken tenders and stuff like that throughout. And there's nothing wrong with that. I freaking love the food. I'm not gonna lie. But I just can't do it right now because I'm focused on a different goal. And there's like a constant pressure. Hey, come do shots with me next door. Hey, come do this. Hey, like have a bite of my, pizza. There's this constant pressure, but you have to choose it's integrity within yourself. And every time that you say yes to something else that's outside of your like scope, or it doesn't necessarily have to be competing, but outside of what you're really wanting, you're like doing yourself a disservice. You're lying to yourself in a sense. So like I've had to constantly like build the callus with that, and that takes a lot of time.
I think that we all hear a call to improve our lives. That's in a lot of ways, that's kind of like the purpose of life, is to get better at living life. And everybody hears that voice. It's stronger in some than others, and it's stronger at different points than it is at other times. And it's been my experience, at least, that spending time around people who choose not to answer that call, or who don't they don't either they're either unwilling or unable to take those steps or stick with those steps, they really, really, really feel bad whenever they see someone else doing it.
Mhm.
It's a reflect some oftentimes when you're talking about something really personal like this, oftentimes another person's success can be a reflection of your failure.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there's a lot, especially I think in like food and bev. I mean, that's just stereotypical of people who are going to stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning every single day and kind of live this like vampire life of drinking and partying.
Mhm.
I just imagine there are a lot of people who w- know they need to change, and every once in a while somebody changes, and it's probably really hard for some of those people to watch it happen and not be able to do it themselves.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of friends by I think I left the bar industry for like a full year at one point just to like get away from it. I wasn't downtown, I didn't go out just because I had been in the spiral where I was getting sucked into that the full industry stereotype. And I knew it wasn't me. And after a couple months of that, I was like, I gotta go. And a lot of people took it personal. But it's not personal to them, it's personal to me. And so if you want to improve, you do have to make those big sacrifices sometimes, because at the same time it might seem something going out drinking every weekend, it might seem insignificant to a lot of those people, but it's your life, like, and a lot of that goes by way too fast. And you could, get hit by a drunk driver, you could be the drunk driver, you could, get the wrong bag of drugs and end up not waking up. So it's like there's so many risks involved that, could possibly end your life, and it's not worth it. And I think a lot of people are just so sad and stuck in this like vicious circle. They don't know how to get out and they don't want to ask for help, so they just continue it. And so when somebody does get out of it, it's like, oh, they don't want to be around that person either because now they're like reminded that they're still making the same choices. So I totally understand what you mean.
Yeah, well, there's another risk too, and that's 10, 15, 20 years pass and you haven't created the rewarding things in life. You haven't built, haven't invested, you haven't put pennies in the piggy bank of a life well lived, because
Mhm.
it's very everything has a cost, but in the moment it's very easy to stick with a routine of sleeping really late, going to a job where you just got to perform kind of in that moment, and then you go out, you um drown your sorrows with
Mhm.
whatever your choice is with that. Like that cycle, time can just disappear whenever you're living
Mhm.
that lifestyle. And nobody's beyond redemption. And I truly believe that in my heart, that no matter who you are, no matter what course your life has taken, no matter what mistakes you've made, you can always answer that call to improve your life. I truly believe that. But there is kind of a fact of the matter that after a certain point and after a certain age, some of the things that make life rewarding aren't going to be available to you anymore. You can't
Mhm.
start a family at a certain point. You can't really begin investing in certain things at a certain point in life. And so it's hard to see that when you're young, especially if you're like young and good looking and smart and charismatic, and you can be in an environment where everything works and you're just partying all the time and there's pleasure all around you. And yeah, you've got the lows that come with the absence of that stimulation, but all you need is more stimulant and you can fix that. So it's
Yeah.
it's really hard when you're young to have that sort of like vision of the future and to be motivated to act on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely made some crazy decisions with that stuff. Um, but it's all just it's as simple as a choice. You just decide spending less time in those environments and filling your time with other things that bring you more value. And then once you slowly pull away from those days that you're spending, whether it's in the industry or whatever, the people that you're with, you start to get a little bit more perspective. Sometimes you can't see things because they're right in front of you. You have to like kind of take a step back away from them a little bit. Um, and they look different. And then you start to appreciate the time you're not there. And I think that's what happened to me. I started lowering the days that I was working down, in the environment, and increasing the days that I was training people, or, taking the risk and getting, another job that wasn't involving the same stuff. And then I started realizing like, oh, like these aren't some of them weren't my actual friends. They were just like my drinking buddies. You know what I mean? So it's like you're just there because of association at some point.
You from like the earliest dawnings of being a person, which is like what happens when you exit adolescence in life. You start to like have this self-awareness that you're a person and you make decisions in life, and you got to grow up at some point. It's kind of like a psychological process of maturation that people go through.
Mhm.
When you were in that experience, there was somebody who basically was lying to you and taking advantage of you, somebody that you
Mhm.
trusted and loved very deeply. Did that
Mhm.
affect your ability to trust other people as you grew up?
Um, I would say yes and no, because at the same time, yeah, most people that have had those kinds of experiences, I would say it's affecting me more now as an adult, now that I've learned all of this. Because I didn't know the lie was there until November of this last year. So this is all like new information to me. Um, so that's like still something I'm processing. Um, but I still am a risk taker. Like I still allow people to show me who they are, and sometimes I stay longer than I need to in friendships or relationships because I like to make sure everything's exercised before all the options are gone. Um, but I don't think it's affecting my trust in people. I think it's more I've repeated the types of people I bring into my life because that's the type of behavior that I put off. So I think I a lot of times come off as a high vibration person because I'm high energy. I get things done. I go through my day front to back. I'm usually never in a bad mood. Anger is not something I show pretty easily. So generally speaking, I think that attracts a lot of certain people, and that could actually bring the wrong people in too, because people that don't have their shit figured out or want to take from you will see that and they want to be closer to you. So they say things and do things to manipulate you and get in your space. And a lot of times end up taking from you or wasting time, or whether it's financial, business, friends. Like a lot of the times we attract low vibration people because of that. So I'm learning as an adult now to know where I put my time if it's not outside of my business. So that's been the struggle for me, I think, in recent years.
What you were describing is another example of your strength is your weakness, because you're a person who you're a person who's had to become independent, who's had to be strong, who's had to work hard and put that energy out there, be responsible for yourself, and that can attract people who feed off of energy. That absolutely can. And you're also somebody who obviously takes a certain degree of responsibility for helping others. You want to see other people succeed. That's a part of your professional life and probably a part of your personal life as well.
Mhm.
So, do you feel like you can be susceptible to the energy vampires out there?
Oh, for sure. And it's like it gets you in trouble because you're like, "Oh, I want to see the good in people." And so we like allow people to have like more than one chance to do us dirty, so to speak. Um and you that's like part of the stress management. You're like, oh, I can handle it because we have this long wick. We have this like huge long wick before we actually are like, okay, enough is enough. And people see that, so they're like, oh, they can handle a lot of my shit. you know um and so whether it's friends, family members, even, um or like I've had bad business partners and it happens. So it's like you just have to know, you have to really vet people before you like allow them. to just like do whatever they want.
Do you think that people are mostly good or mostly bad?
I think generally good, or they're trying to be good. There's another podcast I was on last year, and something he said that resonated with me was like, we're all just doing our best. And like sometimes our best is not great. And that's what I mean, like, my dad, for instance, not doing great with all the stuff that's, coming out. It's like he's had to create this reality for himself so that he can operate normally in society. But his reality isn't good. Like it doesn't work for other people's, and that's okay. You have to like allow people to be who they are, and they just might not be your people. That's all it really comes down to.
I think that in my own life, I've sort of always had the gift of seeing into people and seeing people as they really are. And I'm
Mhm.
generally a pretty cynical person, but
Mhm.
somehow I'm never looking for the best in people, but somehow I'll always see it. And it's a really it's a strange phenomenon when you can see somebody who is going to make a bad decision, particularly somebody who's going to make a bad decision that will may do you harm, but you
Right.
can still see that, you still see the good in them,
Hmm.
and you're almost rooting for the good part of them. You're almost rooting for the light to win out over the dark, but sometimes you got to like root for them from a distance.
Yeah. Even in coaching, like there's clients that, I mean, we always want our clients to see the results that they're begging us to see, and we want the good things, but then they're making choices that we have no control over, or they're lying to us about the things that they're doing. And, or they're just not showing up. And so it's almost like a disappointing thing because we know they're capable, we know they have a desire for it. So we're rooting for them, but you can only meet people where they're able to meet you. And if someone's not really willing to show up the way that they need to, then you have to have that conversation with, as far as training goes or coaching goes. But it's the same thing in personal life. Like you can't expect people to meet you where you're at all the time because a lot of times they're nowhere close. So
Do you think it's a struggle for a lot of your clients to show up for themselves?
I think it's a struggle for most of us. There's a big, I mean, it's been talked about a little bit on social media now, with all the information we have on there, but a lot of people they mix up the idea of motivation with discipline, and they rely on motivation. Like I constantly hear when I'm, talking to people that want to train or they want to be better, I'm just not motivated, I don't have the energy. I'm like, I'm not motivated half the time either. I'm not like excited to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do stairmaster. Like, not every day. So there's days that you just don't want to do stuff, and it's like that's when you have to kick in that discipline and remind yourself like why you're doing it in the first place. So I think generally speaking, like showing up is the hardest part out of all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I personally am an extremely lazy person. I sleep is my favorite activity in
I like to
life.
sleep. Yeah.
Um, but it's sometimes you have to make a decision whether you're going to be miserable one way or another way. And I know for me, um, I've always sort of, I've always been in and out of fitness things my whole life. I was an athlete in high school. I was a pretty good athlete in high school. And then as time passes, though, and your body changes, the conscious
Mhm.
effort you have to put into that stuff shifts in a major, major way. So there's one thing to think about if you're in your 20s and things are going great for you. Like it gets a lot harder as time passes. But
Mhm.
I think that is in, the past sort of year and a half when I've gotten really serious about fitness myself, there were a lot of times where I had to have really embarrassing internal dialogues about just getting up, just going out
Mhm.
the door, just driving to the parking lot of the gym, just going
Mhm.
inside, just walking for a little while on the treadmill and like taking those steps over and over again to just start desensitizing myself to that pain response of going and doing this thing that's going to be uncomfortable for a little while physically. And the thing is, though, if you're able to play that game and you're able to sort of trick yourself in that way, you eventually you will have invested to the point where you need to protect your investment. And you start going because you've gotten so far that you don't want to jeopardize what you've accomplished at that point.
Mhm.
And that's but the trouble with that is that whenever you have that inevitable crash, with your diet or life happens, you don't make it to the gym for a week or whatever, then you sort of feel like you've lost everything, and you just got to keep perspective at that point too that you lost something, but it ain't coming back by avoiding it.
Mhm. Yeah, that guilt sinks in and you're like, "Oh, okay. Well, now I'm really not gonna go because I've already not been going or haven't been." And the way I look at it though is like I notice for myself, like when I'm not disciplined with my fitness, that's my non-negotiable. It transpires into other things in my life. So, how I show up in my friendships or my business or whatever else. Like if I'm not like making my training a priority, whether it's when I'm on prep or not, for a competition, if I'm not staying disciplined there, it's going to show up in other areas. But when I am disciplined and am like really routine and make it a point to come and show up, like my business and other things become so much easier because you've already created a space for yourself to like commit. And I think it's easier for people to commit to bigger things in life when they have their basic, like whether it's just walking every day or whatever. When you put those things into your routine, makes other things so much easier.
Do you feel like having to show up for clients as a coach affects your energy for showing up for yourself?
Oh, for sure. The saying "tend your own garden" comes to mind because really good at giving advice, but sometimes hard to take your own. So, um, we're therapists in a sense. Like I said, my clients know my stuff. I know their stuff. Like, we come and unload on each other. Sometimes my clients will just cry and they don't even want to work out. And they're like, "Hey, can we just like walk today?" Or they'll just have a breakdown. They just need to talk to somebody. Like that happens more often than not. And then we just work through the stuff, work through the hard stuff and as much as I can help them. And then the next session is back to it. And I feel like if you just show up in the sense of being there, like for me, being there for them helps me like get some perspective on my own stuff. But also, I can get wrapped up in, you know, coaching and doing all the things and writing the routines and making sure everyone's eating what they're supposed to be eating. And then when I'm not on like a contest prep like I am now, I'll come home, I'll like I'll get like burger from In and Out on the way over, and then I'll just sit here and I'll go to sleep early after like not drinking water all day and just like three coffees deep, you know what I mean? So it's like it could be easy to like filter, your life around them and then forget about yourself. So I think parents do that a lot too.
So you're like kind of a you're kind of a hard ass in some ways. I can tell you're somebody who's able to sort of cast herself into the flames and is not afraid of that. Do
Mhm.
you especially in since you just found out that a lot of the things in your life were not the way that you thought they were going to or were not what you thought they were at the time. Do you struggle to like have an identity of yourself outside of your work and outside of these things that you pour yourself into? Like, is that starting to like sort of bubble up beneath the surface for you?
That's a good question. I don't think I've thought of that one yet. Now I'm like, oh, hold on. This is a deep one. No, honestly, I've always been the same person. So, um, I think it's easier in relationships to lose yourself with who you are and like the types of music and things like that. But now that I've been in the space that I'm in now, which is single for 2 years, focused on my business, in a space where I am in a healthier place, I think I've been able to like revisit things that I forgot about. Um, and I think that happens more often than not nowadays is people build their identity around their partners and they forget why they started dating in the first place. And so I think a lot of my lessons over the last couple of years, because I've always been in long-term relationships, and then before that was my, being there for my family. So it was like I've never really been like single for a period of time. So I think I built a lot of how I show up based on the person I'm dating or family members and things like that. So you forget like things that you like to do when you're not in your own space. And like for instance, I've lived in San Diego 8 years now. There are places that people go every weekend that I've never been to. And so the last couple of years, I'm like, oh, Torrey Pines is a place to hike. And I'm like, oh, I just went to Torrey Pines for the first time. Like, you lived here almost a decade. You've never been to Torrey Pines? So I was like, no, it's like the one of the best hiking spots. And then there's like restaurants I still haven't been to. There's like things that I just never put myself in a place to do because I built my identity, a lot of it, on the person I was with. And so in my place in life, my personal life wise, I've finally gotten to a place where I'm like, oh, I know what I like to do. I don't, I know what I don't like. I know the music I like, things like that. And I think um, some people don't ever get to that point. They might be like just coasting based on the relationships they have with other people, and they don't really like choose what they actually want because they're just comfortable, uncomfortably comfortable. But it's an easier choice than, figuring it out.
Did you feel a sense of insecurity whenever you kind of like stepped out and had that realization of like it's time to figure out who I am outside of anybody, any external like definition of yourself?
Well, I think when you're changing your normal routine in general, it's going to be a little uncomfortable. And so for me, I had built my business and at the time I had pets and things like that. I had built all my routine based on like my business, and then my business was around my partner's needs and what they wanted, and where the dogs needed to be and stuff like that. And so and my lack of traveling and all that was because I can't leave because they're going to be here, whatever. So it was a lot of like not saying yes to things. And so I think saying yes to things was really hard for me because I was like, oh, I'm normally like a no, I can't because I have this going on. So I think that was like a nice thing to experience. And then like not needing to be on somebody else's schedule was like a huge change for me because I was always on someone else's schedule. So it was a big adjustment period, and it's going to be uncomfortable and weird and like kind of messy. But as soon as you like figure out what your stuff is, that's when it like starts to make sense. You're like, oh, okay, I'm like doing it. But it takes a while.
You definitely seem to have gone through like these sort of stages of like self-actualization through your life.
Mhm.
You stepped out of a unhealthy family life where you were thrust into the role of provider and adult. Then you had to step away from that sort of twilight of teenage years where you were working and you were still living with other people, but you had to be more of an
Mhm.
adult and focus on yourself. Then you had to transition of doing the thing that you were was at the core of your life, which was being a fitness professional. And now
Mhm.
your latest transition has been to um be your own self and not have your life defined by the input of anybody else, really. What do you think
Mhm.
your next transition is?
It's a good question. I think right now my biggest thing is like I chose contest prep again for a bodybuilding show. And it's a long journey and a lot of it's very stoic because we can't have the same experiences that you can when you're not on prep unless you're with other people that are. So like I can't go out to dinner with friends and do all of those things. Or if I do, I'm bringing my meal prep with me, which is really funny. Um, or like if I travel, I can't drink, so I have to like find other things. It's just like little nuances like that. So that's going to be a constant challenge because San Diego is beautiful, and especially in the summertime, everyone's doing all the things. Um, so that's like a big challenge, but again, it reverts back to the discipline. So I think after this show, I have to decide if I'm going to continue doing this. And I think I've already made a decision that if I do place, like I'm going to go professional, which means this, like my life is going to revolve around it. So um, that's still, I think it's gonna happen. I kind of just have a feeling, but I don't want to disappoint myself in saying that it will when it won't. But it's all about effort, and you have to put yourself in a position where things are possible. And if it doesn't happen, that's a reflection of my work. You know what I mean? So I don't have anybody to be mad at it about. So that's kind of my next transition is to like just focus on this straight and narrow focal point, and if something comes out of it, awesome. I can make my life decisions around it when it does. That's pretty much what that is. But um, building your identity around being a bodybuilder is a very interesting process too.
How so?
There's just a lot of misconceptions around it, and it's funny. I started doing this in 2011 was my first one. Took like 9 years off and then did another one 2022. And it's really funny. The average person has, we just see what they see what they're given. So whether it's Instagram or whatever else, like they assume people are vain because they look the certain way. But truthfully, most bodybuilders being in the space that I'm in are some of the most like compassionate, empathetic, like very quiet people. And it goes back to like pain and like suffering. And I think a lot of people that have endured mentally put themselves through crazy physical things. And so I think there's this misconception like people can't date or they can't do XYZ because they are a bodybuilder, or they can't enjoy life because they have, certain things that they need to do. Like we could still do all the things, but you just have to explain it to people because a lot of times they're like, "Oh, you're a bodybuilder, you probably, there's just like so many negative things that come with it." I don't know. It's just a very interesting navigation. I'll put it that way.
Well, certainly, you're used to uh being conscientious of the way you live your life, and so that's sounds to me like you've been prepping for that mindset for a whole bunch of years at this point.
Mhm.
I'm curious to know though, like you definitely seem like somebody who doesn't harbor resentment for other people in your life. How do you avoid that? Because I think it'd be really easy for a lot of people to have had the life experiences that you did growing up and to harbor deep resentment or even resentment for partners who, may not have treated people well and that sort of thing. Like how do you avoid that?
I don't think it's avoidable, to be honest. I do get those resentment feelings for sure. For instance, when you have a childhood like mine and you're in a position to be a provider, you typically attract people you need to provide for as well. And I think that my last major relationship, I fell into that. I fell into, let me take care of things. Like, I want you to do what you need to do. And then I would work like 17-hour days just to be able to make sure both people are taken care of because that's how I showed up as a kid. So I thought that's how you're supposed to show up as an adult. You're just patterned to do it. It's like a deep conditioning. And so once the shit hits the fan, we go, oh, this person sucks. And then there's like this huge resentment that comes along with it. But when you step outside of it, like I also chose to be there. So that's not just the other person's fault. Like you chose that space. And I think a lot of the time, resentment comes from people doing us, a disservice or betraying us or whatever it might be, or disappointment in itself. Um, But we did play a role in that at some point. Whether it's a childhood role, yeah, you don't really have too much control when you're a kid or not, but you have control over how you show up as an adult. And I think I don't really build resentment because one, it takes too much energy to hate someone or dislike them. If they're taking space up in my brain, then I'm just not dealing with stuff I need to be dealing with. And then two, it's just like it's just a negative space for yourself. Like if you're constantly thinking about how bad somebody is or how shitty they were to you, like you're almost attracting more of that into your life too. Like, you know, the universe only knows the energy that you give it. And so if you're constantly like, oh, everyone's doing me wrong, or this person did me wrong, or I'm tired of being treated this way, you're like almost inviting it back into your space, if that makes sense. So I've just tried to avoid holding that as like an emotion because it doesn't bring me anything, if that makes sense. So it's easier said than done though.
If we look back at our childhoods and say, or our early teenage years, young adulthoods, before those periods where we had the self-awareness to sort of take charge of our lives for ourselves,
Mhm.
um, and we look back with resentment, it's a trap that robs you from the things you really want in life. It's so easy to say, I wish my life was like this, but because these things happened, that didn't come to me the way it comes to other people. I mean, I know for myself, I've always been so envious of the friends that I had growing up that had like a healthy family structure and both parents were at home and their parents really sat down and thought like, okay, how can we structure our lives so that our kids are going to get the right values and have the tools they
Mhm.
need to be successful in life. And you look at those people and a lot of those people that I've known, everybody's got stress in life. Everybody struggles, everybody suffers, but
Mhm.
those people often seem to be really better equipped to cope with the problems of life because those lessons were implanted in them.
Yeah.
And but I know that every second of my life I've spent sitting around feeling resentment for somebody else's actions that have affected my life. I wasted that moment. I wasted that moment of figuring it out for myself and taking the steps that I needed to get what I want or to build my own values or to build the structure in my life. But it's a hard thing to let go of when you've been wounded like that from a very early age.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely I think again it comes along with that anger emotion, which is such an easy thing to show. And I think people that are quick to be angry or reactive or resentful, like verbally or physically resentful, where you can see it, then a lot of times you just have like poor grounding. You're just not grounding yourself enough to be able to handle your emotions properly or logically. We've all been there.
Sarah, what do you consider to be your greatest success in life?
Mm, Good question. I say definitely breaking cycles. Just not choosing not choosing where I came from as like, it's something I identify with, but it's not my identity. And being able to step outside of that space and not think so much like a survivor, more so of like, this is what gave me, this is what I was given, and I've decided to make a different life for myself. I would have never thought like I would have lived in Southern California. Um, or, I grew up in such like a impoverished area and you know, there's a lot of kids that are still living there and I'm still close to those people too, which is awesome. Um, but going back and visiting every now and again, it definitely like gives me perspective on like where I came from. And it's just like I just went back like 2 weekends ago. Um, and I'm like super grateful that I did have all of the shitty things that have happened to me because it's like you either decide to just let it affect you or you decide differently. And I think a lot of people don't even know that's a choice. Like they just think that, they just know what's in front of them. That's it. But I don't know. I think from a young age, I just knew I wasn't in the right space. And I don't know where that thought came from, but I don't think everybody gets that. So I would say like at its lowest form, that's like my biggest success. I wouldn't equate it to anything else at the moment.
What's the hardest thing you've ever had to do?
Hmm, that is a tough one. Yeah, I don't know. I'd say leaving my last relationship was probably the toughest because I was with that person almost 7 years and I didn't know anybody else down here. And so I just knew it wasn't serving me anymore. The relationship wasn't healthy for me. And but going into an environment where you don't know anybody else, as far as like family or safety net, and you've been living with that person or they've been living with you for a certain period of time. There's a lot of people that are married like 25 plus years and decide that they have to leave. And you can still deeply care and love for somebody and decide to choose yourself. And I think that was the hardest thing for me was going and accepting the fact that you can still have a deep love for somebody, but know that it's just not right for you. And choosing yourself every day after that is an even harder like thing to choose. Because you're constantly like pulled by that emotion, but you like for me, I had to really go, okay, no, this is all the things that happened. Are you really willing to put yourself through that again? It's like a constant like push and pull. But a lot of people like just decide that it's easier to stay because they don't know anything else. Even if it's uncomfortable or unhealthy, they just stick around. And I wouldn't have opened the gym that I have now if I didn't leave. I wouldn't have like friends that I have if I didn't decide to leave. So it's like the hardest things sometimes bring the biggest blessings, and you have to decide like if you're willing to do that or not. So,
I think that's an excellent lesson. And I think that in a lot of ways that what you just described, that mindset is definitive of your life. It's um, being transformed by difficult situations that maybe shouldn't be in the first place, but you find yourself in
mhm,
the situation and it's going to change you in some way. And you have a choice and an obligation as an individual to direct that change, to use that experience. And
mhm,
I think your entire life has been defined by that. And I think that the maturity and the sensibility that you bring to those life experiences is very admirable. And I think that I can totally see why people go to you for coaching and why people are willing to trust you and rely on you because you rely on yourself and you do exude that strength. And I know that a lot of people are gonna take away some motivation from hearing all about your life today. And
mhm.
really grateful to you for spending some time talking with me. How can people find you online? Where do you want to send people?
For those that do have Instagram, it's Moore fitness SD as in San Diego. So that's my Instagram handle. I'm just Sarah Moore on Facebook. There's a billion of us, so good luck trying to find me on there. And then website is just Sarah Moore Fitness. So my last name, two O's again, fitness.com. Um, but really like even just sending me a message if this is resonating with you guys or you have, you know, questions about something hard that I've been through, maybe you're feeling that you have, you know, you need some guidance in that sense too, like feel free to send me a message or email through any of those avenues that I've just given you. Um, because sometimes just talking about it is like what starts that whole process of change, you know. And you might not realize it yet, but that's like showing up. That's a form of showing up.
Absolutely, very well said. Sarah, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you. This is awesome. Love the platform. Excited to see what you guys have coming out. And I'll continue to follow the page because it's just great. Of
Well, thank you very much.
course.
And thank you to everybody who listened to us today, and we'll talk to you next time.